So yeah, hi. I'm the news applications editor at NPR. Just real, actually I hadn't written this down to talk about, but real quick, so we call it news applications, we call it news apps, and then people think app like apps on your phone, and then it gets all confusing. The word app just kind of got away from us. It was when I was at ProPublica, Scott Klein, who's now the news applications editor there, and I were sitting around trying to figure out what we should call the team in Chicago. And we didn't know. We're like, whoa, it could, the New York Times team is something like they're the interactive multimedia something. They've got 10 words in their name, and we try to come up with something kind of short. And so it seemed like, well, we're making web applications about the news, so we'll call it the news applications team. And then the word app kind of caught wildfire. So, but we're stuck with it, and people use it, and I'm relatively pleased with it. So anyway, so I worked at Chicago Tribune for about 3 years. And when I was there, one of the big projects we worked on was we were working towards creating a new mobile version of our website, which wasn't a particularly controversial idea. Our mobile website kind of stunk, and our iPhone and Android apps were fine. But it was sort of an unusual project at Trib Company, because we were actually making technology plans inside the newsroom, which is not generally how that place worked. That place was very sort of centrally controlled technology, and the newsroom just kind of took what they gave them. But our team sort of enabled Trib to make some more technology kind of decisions and actually build some stuff, which was pretty fun. But anyway, the project, there was something about the project that really bothered me. It was the premise that we had decided, like the name of the project was, a mobile website, right? And that we had decided right up front that was the right thing to do. We were talking about, betting the farm on mobile, yet we hadn't actually looked at, why? What's the point? Why are we doing this? And so we sort of stepped back, and it was just for a few days, but we stepped back and asked ourselves, questions about who our audience was. And, I'm all for building things really fast and not getting bogged down in decisions, but I feel it's really important you have to ask yourself when you're making a product like this, who's your audience, what are their needs, and what can you build for them? So we asked questions like, who are we trying to reach, right? How do these people that we're attempting to reach, how do they live? What's their daily routine, right? What do they read? How do they get news? And, oh, no, don't tell me my pictures aren't going to load. All right. So I was worried the projector wasn't going to be big enough for the slide, which is pretty awesome. Well, it turns out that our audience, they listen to the radio on their way to work, and they read their tablet while they're eating their cereal in the morning, and they read on their phones when they're online at the supermarket and on the bus, and they're reading their phone on the toilet. And they watch The Daily Show, on their computer when they're making dinner for their children. And they're reading Facebook when they're in bed, on their phones, in the dark, right? These are people who aren't necessarily, the audience we were trying to reach are people who aren't necessarily sitting down with the paper every morning, but they were still consuming a hell of a lot of news. So the guiding principle of the project, sort of the big idea that we wanted to address, was that we needed to meet people where they were at, right? We needed to reach our audience specifically at these sort of in-between moments in their day, right? And when you're in bed, or when you're commuting, or when we observed both through market research and through just sort of personal introspection that we were getting news not as a planned event, but as that moment between things. And we do it a lot. So we wanted to address people during the sort of cracks in their day. And actually, I'll briefly explain this since I got a second. This is, I just lifted this chart from a Guardian presentation that was put online a couple days ago. But these are the different colored lines of the different products, and the different products are basically related to a device. And so you'll see throughout the days, we have a very similar kind of traffic curve at Chicago Tribune. So you'd see people in the morning, they'd be on their phone, and then they get to work and they'd be on the desktop. And then in the evening, you'd have a nice spike when people were back in they're in bed, or they're watching, they're on their sofa. I particularly love this chart because there's a massive spike in Facebook during tea time, which we don't celebrate in Chicago, but the Guardian's an English newspaper, right? So it didn't take very long to come to this conclusion. It was just a couple of days of sort of introspection and talking with marketing and talking to ourselves. And of course, at the end of this, we sort of arrived at the same conclusion that we really needed to work on a mobile website. But we knew why, and we had a better idea of what we wanted to build. But the point to me, though, is this whole thing isn't about mobile. Mobile's not going to solve it for us. But it's not about a specific technology or a phone or something, a device, but it's addressing your product to how we could fit into people's lives these days. So by week, weekday, desktop, weekend, mobile. Lovely chart. And then this I just tossed in at 7 o'clock this morning. Apparently the big news yesterday is that year-on-year PC sales in the first quarter are down 14%, which was a massive and unexpected drop. People have stopped buying computers. It's kind of wild. I mean, they're going to continue. Desktop's not going away. But this is the financial people were all rather surprised that the drop was this much. They were expecting about half as much. So the chart is a bit dramatic for my taste. I wouldn't draw a chart like that without that much context, but it was the first I could find on short notice. Not yet. So anyway, all that said, I don't know what your audience needs. I mean, that's up to you to ask that question of your audience and yourselves. But I bet that we've got some similar problems. And so I thought what I'd talk about today are the problems that I've been thinking about with my new job at National Public Radio. So we started the team was founded in July last year. Our team is made up of 2 software developers, a designer, currently 1 designer, hopefully 2 very soon, a reporter, and myself. My background, like Gary said, is in software development, but most of the time I'm editing and managing projects. So I have the job that's very similar to any other editor in his organization. Let's see, am I going next? Yeah, so when we opened up shop last year, we absorbed the graphics desk. So we do a lot of things a graphics desk might do. We do maps, we do charts, we do data visualizations. But then we also are doing data analysis, stuff folks might call computer-assisted reporting. We do photo and video projects, and all sorts of web-based and data-driven special coverage like election results. But one thing we decided to do really early on is that we decided for ourselves that everything we do at NPR needs to be awesome on mobile. It wasn't a mandate that anyone gave us. It just, but I like having rules. I like constraints. I think they foster creativity. And so the big rule on our team is that if it doesn't work on mobile, it doesn't work. So far, this as one of our guiding principles is working out for us. So how do you build things for mobile? One way to do it is you build native applications, like Instagram here. Most of the apps you get from an app store and you install on your phone are written with native code. I won't go into the details of that, right? But the thing is that they're generally pretty awesome. The apps you download are pretty rich experiences. They have the power to be really interactive and rather beautiful. But they also could be very expensive to create and are device specific usually, right? So so someone wrote Instagram and it existed first on, I think it was only on iPhone, right? And then it took months. It was like 6 months or longer for them to release an Android version because it's just you have to do it again. And so I don't like that. It's expensive. So what we do is something called responsive design. We don't build native apps. The nerds call it responsive web design, but in sort of relatively plain language, we build regular old websites. We do the web like anybody else builds websites. But we just use a handful of tricks to make sure the website that we're making works on any screen size. So, several news sites have taken the leap and launched responsive designs. NPR is currently halfway through a responsive design right now. And I might add the digital team is being really clever about it. What they've done is instead of launching one big expensive project, right, a giant year-long, year-plus full product redesign, they're rolling it out as they go. But if you go to like npr.org, our homepage, it doesn't look like this at all. It does not collapse nicely to mobile. But it was a really clever trick, right? Because they were, by not attacking the homepage, they were able to teach the organization the value of designing pages like this before sort of entering the political quagmire of a homepage redesign, which is something that has there's just too many cooks in the kitchen, too many editors, too much politics involved. So by doing it from the bottom up, totally clever hack, they've been rolling this thing out slowly. So every couple of weeks, a new type of page on npr.org becomes responsively designed. So I just admire the process there. And the thing is that it's not, responsive web design is not technically difficult. Compared to, say, making web pages. The challenge is, what's hard is organizational, right? What's hard is prioritizing. Prioritizing your design so it will work nicely on a desktop computer and on a mobile phone and all points in between, right? It's figuring out where things will go and how they'll flow and what goes first. Because on mobile, only one thing can go first. On desktop, you could have all sorts of things going first. We'll get to that in a second. So how do you prioritize? There's a great way to hack that process to force you to prioritize, technique called mobile first design. And I'm not being paid to sell these colorful books. These are by a company called A Book Apart. They make lovely slides. They're also pretty good books. They're about this big. You can read them on a short plane flight. But the idea of mobile first means more or less what you might think it means. You design the mobile version of your project first. So when we sketch something, so our team, when we're sketching up a new project, we try to sketch what it looks like on mobile. Right? We draw this little version. And that forces us to prioritize, that forces us to put things in a certain order. And then after we sort of sort out what we feel it should look like on a small device, then we take the design and we draw bigger sketches, and we draw bigger sketches, and we think about how it might stretch out to a larger screen. And it's a restrictive process, but but again, this is about embracing constraints, and it's a good way to sort of force your brain into making decisions you wouldn't normally make if you started with the big screen first. So you have to ask yourself, what do we lead with? What's most important? It's no different than editing a story or designing a front page of a newspaper. Yet somehow newspaper website homepage designs are super bad at this. I'm only holding up NPR here, which I think is okay, because I didn't feel like picking on anybody today. But most news websites are sort of a mess of priorities, right? The joke. This is the joke at Tribune. At Tribune, our website looked kind of like a Bill Cosby sweater. Everything very, very brightly colored and scattered about, and they're just blinding. Where each element is equally important. this is important, and that's important, and that's important, and that's a product of lazy design. That's a product of organizational politics, right? And when everything is high priority, then everything is effectively low priority, right? So mobile first design at that is a great boss trick. It's a way for me to make, when my boss doesn't want to choose, I can make the boss choose. On a small screen, you have to organize it. So what's the most important? Okay, we'll put that on top. So you can follow along if you want to. This is a project that we designed mobile first is for a story about how wildfires have become a big problem, which I'm certain y'all are probably familiar with. The idea that decades of firefighting have led to a surplus of burnable stuff on the ground. So now fires are more frequent and frequently more dangerous, right? And the original pitch the science desk came to us with was they had, I don't know, 100 years or 50 years of wildfire data, and for locations of wildfires over time, and they said, hey, let's put that on a map. Let's look at the story over time. And you'd see a trend. If you made a map and then you made it animated, you'd see more dots happening later, right? And that was all right, and that's actually what a handful of other news organizations did. They did exactly that with the exact same data that we were looking at when they wrote the similar story. But that didn't resonate with me. It didn't speak to me. Because if I had just heard a story about how America is a tinderbox, and I want to know if my house is going to burn down, right? I don't care about where fires have been. I want to know about where fires are going to be, right? And so we ask ourselves, the same sort of user-centric design questions I was talking about earlier with the Tribune design. We ask ourselves, who are our users, right? And there are lots of people who might want to look at our application about wildfires. There might, decision makers, firefighters, but those are the people we're trying to address. The people we're trying to address are people who just heard a scary story about fire on the radio, and what they want to know, what need they have, is they want to know, am I safe? And they want to know, are my loved ones safe, right? So historical data wasn't going to cut it. So Matt Waite, formerly of the Texas Tribune and the State Impact Project at NPR. He's our resident reporter and telephone expert. If you know software developers, we don't use telephones. So he called up the Forest Service, and they pointed us to this ugly but really super data set that they update every day. And what this is something they publish on their website every day, but they also create this as data that we can analyze and we can render ourselves. This is the daily wildfire risk. And so the idea is that they create this for use by firefighting organizations all over the country to figure out if they're going to have a busy day today or not, right? The little dots represent I believe the observation stations, the weather reporting stations. So every day this map changes on their website, and the map's about this big. It's not particularly useful, but it's a great data set. So we built something to interpret it. We designed and tested and redesigned and retested a mobile app that would answer our two use cases, right? So this is a Post-it notepad. We were just designing up comps in like Photoshop and taping them to the Post-it notepad and walking around the office and handing it to people and saying, hey, use this. And we refined our design a handful of times just based on paper prototyping. But our two use cases, right? So use case one was, am I safe? And we can address that by clicking the Find My Location button. Use case two, are my loved ones safe? Punch in your zip code or your city, your address, right? And what it would do is it zooms into, actually, I don't have a slide of that. That's frustrating. It zooms into your specific location. So actually, let's try it out. Live demos are always the best because they always work. Find my location, and we're going to allow it. And I'm guessing, oh, today's not reported. Well, it is snowing. So But if we wanted to look up somewhere that had a little more danger today, oh, come on, Wi-Fi, don't fail me now. You can do it. Be faster. There we are. Let's look at Dallas, Texas. Wildfire danger Dallas, Texas is very high. Pretty simple. It doesn't do much. It just uses this one data set, and then it actually gives us the other thing we have on screen. If you can see those sort of little red triangles, those are the locations of current large fires that is from another data set from the Forest Service. So we did this last summer. We're going to bring it back out for this season, and member stations all over the country, are telling their audience about it, so they can go look up their fire weather and bookmark it on their phone. I don't know if everyone's going to be looking up their fire weather every day, but I just sort of love this as an example of it's an example of I guess, of just doing less. We could have done something way bigger. This is not big. This is a small, user-driven thing, as opposed to sort of, I don't know, a lot of. We could have done a lot of indulgent things with this. We could have done a lot of flashy animated video things with this, and we just didn't want to. Anyway, so I've got a few other examples of sort of mobile type work our team does. Just kind of bring it on home here. This one's a little more frivolous. So Oscar Party was a live blog and chat which is about plus live results for the Academy Awards this year, and we built it for folks who were watching TV. Right? We built this. The term of art people use these days is a second screen, right? But the idea was people are probably going to be watching the Oscars on television. But Linda and her friend Mark and her other friends that she invited, they're very funny and have lots of interesting things to say about the Oscars. And most of the stuff they say on the TV at the Oscars is rather dull, right? So we were sort of a back channel humorous commentary that you could watch. And it would have been okay. We would have done decent traffic if we just had it on the desktop. But this is the perfect kind of scenario where someone's going to be sitting on the sofa they're not going to have their laptop in their lap. They're going to have their phone in their lap, or they're going to have their iPad in their lap. So we got to, again, meet people where they're at. When they're watching the Oscars, they're on their phone. This is the big board. So we built. This is slightly different than mobile-ish, I guess. We built this for election night, and the idea was, on the election night, there's a room that's probably about as big as this room. It's our Studio 4A. It's the big radio studio at NPR headquarters, and it's got risers and computers, and they set it up for the big night. And it's one of the few occasions where everyone who makes the radio is in the room at the same time, and everyone who's making in the web. They're all working together in the same place, which is pretty tremendous. And so they have big screens up on the wall, not quite as big. Not actually. My big screens are probably about this wide, right? So a quarter this size. And they needed to have live election results up on the screen. And so we built 3 of these screens, one for the president, one for Senate, and for the House, and had them projected on the wall for the hosts when they were, when they needed to rattle off something, they were ready with the data. And at some point we realized, hey, wait a minute, I'm building this with web stuff. These are just web pages. Why don't we just put this on the internet? Why don't we maybe share it with our audience? They might like it, and it's certainly nothing like anyone else was doing. And that was a very lucky stroke. These big boards did half of our election night traffic. They were massively successful, which was pretty cool. Because I just figured they'd just be a funny thing. We were just kind of doing it on a lark. And it's pretty dense on your phone. Here it is up on the wall. But it's really readable on your iPad. So we actually asked people to send us pictures of themselves using it. We asked people, hey, send us pictures of your NPR party on election night. And these people, we were laughing out loud. They actually projected up on their wall. These are it's kind of hard to see, but these are the half lit faces of someone's children up on the wall. But we got all sorts of pictures of people who were using this projected or just having it set up like on their coffee table. So they've got this board set up on the coffee table, they got the TV on, maybe they have the radio on, they've got a cooler full of beer, enjoying their election party. Let's see here. This piece is a little more solemn. So this was reporter Howard Burkus. He's been researching a story about people dying in grain bins. Which around here, I imagine y'all are probably familiar with the idea that you could die in a grain bin. It was news to me. And the data, there's no good data set for this. There's one researcher at Purdue University who'd maintained a list of everyone who'd been killed in a grain bin and how they died. But besides his data, and he wasn't necessarily prepared to make that data available to the public, and that's his research, which I take issue with. But so Howard, with his help and with other folks and with the help of the Center for Public Integrity and the Kansas City Star, I think, he put together a data set of a couple of the roughly 200 known cases of the last 20 years of people drowning, dying from being buried in grain. And we felt, we talked about lots of different ways to present this story online, and each one of these events has a location. We've got a rough address or a zip code. So we could have made a map. Each of them has sort of a time. There's a day. There's a day of the year it happened. So we could have made sort of timelines, right? But none of those things really would tell a story. A map would show you dots of where there are farms, right? It's a population map of farms. That's not an interesting map. And a timeline would show you that people have been. It would just show you that people have been somewhat sporadically dying. The only interesting thing a timeline would have shown is a brief hiccup or a bump. I think in 2010, because the 29 harvest was wet, and so the grain was stickier, and so more people were walking down the corn that year. But it was not this is not a statistical sample. It's only 200 rows of data, so it was not something that we were going to see a really interesting curve or really tell the story. So but the team was really affected by this story, and especially when we took our data and we correlated it with OSHA's reports about these are sort of like they're not really coroner's reports, but they're the OSHA like examiner's report, and we just couldn't stop reading them. The story specific how these people died. So we said, forget it. What we're going to do is we just want to tell this human story. We want to talk to our audience about how sad this is and how sort of awful it is to die this way. And so all we did was publish the stories. You can download the data set. You can get a spreadsheet of it. But the essence of this was really these accident summaries. And you can filter. You can get some personal context by filtering by state. And that's about it. I'll pause for a second. I didn't really think about the order of these things. This is more fun. So in memoriam, again about death, I guess, though. In memoriam is a tribute piece to the musical artist who died last year. It's one of several sort of rich multimedia experiences we've built that work both on desktop and mobile. I actually kind of like this one better on mobile. People tend to spend more time listening when they've got their headphones in, or when they're just sort of sitting and looking at this thing. Then let's say, they're at work or they're on their desktop computer. They might not have headphones sort of lying around. But I'm really drawn. It's kind of corny, I guess, but I'm really drawn to the idea of this device being like your transistor radio in your pocket. It just can play anything. I think it's kind of thrilling. And then this is our most recent project. Cook your cupboard, kind of silly. We've asked our audience to send us pictures of their estranged pantry items that they have no idea how to deal with. Those things that always accumulate, the strange oils or what do you have, Caro syrups. Some people don't know what to do with beans, and I think they're crazy. We've had a really good time. People have been sending us pictures, and most of us in the team are sitting there writing back to our audience. But it's become a sort of a wonderful little rich online community. There's a handful of people who've really taken it upon themselves to make it their sort of personal mission to tell everyone how to use that strange oil in your cabinet. But this site, on desktop, it's really fun and colorful, but it really, really needs to work on mobile. We actually have got a clue here. Use your smartphone, which we normally don't do. Have a little bug to tell people, hey, forget the desktop, go to your phone for this thing. Because people aren't going to take a picture with a digital camera and then go and sit down at their computer and then plug the camera into the computer and then drag the files on and then go to a web browser and then upload their pictures, right? That is some people will do that, but I certainly wouldn't. But if you pull up on your phone, you walk to your cupboard, you go to the website, you take a picture, you upload, and it's there, right? So being on mobile lets us just take submissions better. Oops, not yet. So there are a lot of teams who do graphics and interactives at other news organizations that think we're out of our minds. I've had especially actually at the NICAR conference we were at recently, I've had arguments with people. They feel like they need a giant canvas for their data visualizations and for their maps and for their charts. They could only do them on a screen. They need that. They need the web width, right? I think it's awesome. I just don't care how much canvas they think they need, because we don't do journalism just to do journalism. We do it for an audience. And if your audience can't see your stuff because they're sitting on their sofa, or if they can't understand the story you're trying to tell because they're lying in bed or they're on the toilet, then you're doing it wrong. So it's definitely a pain to design this way. And we throw out a lot of ideas on our way to one that works. But I do feel like that these constraints breed creativity, and I think this is a solvable problem. And the big screen is a comfortable place to work, but I'd rather learn to do my job well on the small screen. So, thanks. Uh-huh.
Do you always work on that journalist stories, like the wildfire one? Seems like there's going to be a lot of lead time to build, build the web element of that. Do you work with other journalists across the organization? And then how do you manage that kind of relationship and time?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we're learning to do still, and it's been different at NPR than it was in Chicago. I'll talk about my experience in Chicago just because I can speak about that better. In Chicago, we were in the newsroom and we were actually shotgunned throughout it. So there were a similar sized team, and 5 or 6 of us, and I sat on one side of the newsroom by one of the web editors. Ryan sat next to the old science reporter and the cops reporter. So we were, I think, one thing I think was important is being embedded is really important. Being visually there, being accessible, having people walk by our desk and wonder, hey, what are those guys doing with those computers? Was really good for us because we're not your IT staff. We are like photojournalists, except our specialized tool is not a camera, but a laptop and a programming language. So, so being among the journalists and not being segregated, I think, was really helpful. And then process-wise, a lot of times it was about relationships we had made. So people would have seen our work, and they'd come by our desk and say, "Hey, I've got this thing I'm working on." What we were trying to do is get people as early on as possible to say, I've got a data set that I'm looking at, or I've got a spreadsheet, or I've got a FOIA request, a FOIA response, and I'm thinking about how to tell the story. Or ideally, even better than that, would be, hey, I have a question I'm trying to answer, can you help me, right? So it's not like, it's not, I have this data, please put it on the internet. It's what data should I be trying to find to answer this question? And so I mean, one of my favorite projects we did at Tribune, see if this comes up. There we are. This thing's getting a little stale. But this is our nursing home safety reports app. It was a big series of stories about nursing home safety in Chicago, and the reporters had. This is not responsibly designed. I'll talk about that in a second. The reporters were looking through this Illinois Department of Public Health's website, trying to find. They were going through the safety reports and looking specifically for mentions of certain kinds of drugs that were being given to nursing home residents. So what was going on is they were, a nursing home resident was a little Alzheimer's-y, maybe a little ornery, maybe had a bed sore or two, and was being difficult to work with, and they would inject psychotropic drugs into their leg. They were, gross misuse of drugs to basically keep people calm in nursing homes all throughout Illinois. And so they were looking for these specific reports and specific drugs, and they were doing it by hand. And we said, hey, we can help with that. So they basically had 6 months of this project planned out to be going through these reports by hand. And we wrote a little screen scraper, little thing that went to the website, spidered the website, downloaded all the reports, and then searched each individual report for 20 different terms. And I gave them a CD the next day of all the reports they need to read. Here are the reports that mention the things that you've been looking for by hand. And it's not like that kind of they kind of thought I was a wizard, right? But the thing is, writing a screen scraper like that is something that almost anyone can learn to do in a couple of weeks. I mean, it was something I was able to do in a couple hours because I've been doing this for 10 years. But those are the moments, that's the best process moment, is when we can get in and help someone answer the question. And then come back with all this data we've gathered and publish these safety reports. And this was sort of an early version of a sort of different kind of responsive design. We figured if folks are going to be if one of the questions folks have is they hear the story and they want to figure out, hey, where should my loved ones live? What you're going to be doing is you're going to be sitting on your sofa talking. You're not going to be sitting around the computer pointing at the screen. You want to sit on your sofa and talk about it. So this is before anyone was doing anything that would scale nicely. We just figured, and no one had iPads, so we just made them very, very printable. I normally would never put a big printer icon on a news application, but we felt like it really suited this use case, whereas you should print these things out and then sit down on the sofa with your loved ones and talk about the options. Anyway. So yeah, it's kind of all over the place. Sometimes we have like the wildfire piece. We had we did in a week with 3 people, and not full time. If we did it today, we could have done it in about 3 days. But when we did the piece, we were just getting to know each other. So anyway,
Any other questions?
any other questions? I'm not going to get between y'all and sandwiches. Sandwiches. Thank you.
Actually, one more.
Oh.
One more thing. So, first of all, thank you, Brian. Appreciate it. Fantastic. Okay. So what we have next is a group of students who are going to demonstrate to you a project that they've been working on for this semester. And they'll tell you about the project and what the problem is they're trying to solve. And then they'll show you their solution. They've taken it to the point of, they have the diagrams or the wireframes of here's what this would look like if it were a functioning mobile app. They're mainly advertising journalism students. They're not special software development as Brian is. So they haven't yet coded this. The product is to the point of saying, here's our problem, here's how we solved it, here's how we thought about it, and here's what it would look like, here's what it would do. And now we can take this and we'll hand this over to a developer to take it to the next step. And this is one where it was designed for basically for elections, to use in elections, particularly in areas where perhaps mobile phones are the only devices that are working. So as they prepare this, like I said, this was a extracurricular project that they did because they were interested, and frankly, they realized that these are new skills that are in demand and are clearly of help to them and are going to be of help to employers as they graduate. So